Alrighty, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for coming to our Ergonauts Mission Control. My name is Ray Lira. I live in Clovis, New Mexico, and I graduated from the Air Force Academy, and I'm currently a pilot out at Clovis, New Mexico, and I'm also a full-time ergonaut. So, um, today we'll be going over exoskeletons with Dr. Albert Moore.
Not doctor yet.
Doctor candidate. Sorry. And so we have a few other panelists as well. I'll let them kind of talk about themselves real fast before we get started with Mr. Moore. So we'll start off with Steve.
Yeah, I'm Steve Davis. I'm an ergonaut. I'm actually the founder. 2000. I also teach University of Kentucky partnership, the engineering partnership with Toyota. We teach lean. I teach lean ergonomics in line with the Toyota mission. I also work as a technical consultant for companies who do work for the Department of Defense. I'm actually working at a special operations base in New Mexico myself. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. We'll continue with Kirby.
Yes, can you? Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can.
Yeah, okay. That was my wife. She popped in. She didn't know I was on the phone. I'm in a hot San Antonio. It's kind of a little warm out here. I'm retired from Liberty Mutual Insurance Company. I was with Liberty Mutual for about 38 years. I am a certified professional ergonomist, and I guess wearing a hat there. You can see that, Steve?
Yeah, man.
Yeah, got it. So anyway, I'm started up my own company and kind of an independent contractor out there.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being with us here as a panelist, and we'll continue with Nichol Case.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining today. I'm Nichol Case. I'm the CEO for Ergonauts, and I'm really humbled to be on a panel with such an esteemed group of ergonomists. So thank you all for joining us.
Awesome, thank you. And I don't want to mispronounce Miss LaNiesha Littleton.
LaNiesha,
sorry.
Yes, you did just fine. Thank you all for having me. My name is LaNiesha Littleton. I'm an occupational therapist and also certified ergonomist. I'm currently building my own company, iHealth 360. We offer corporate solutions for ergonomics and also injury prevention. And I also currently hold a role with Gilead Sciences. So I manage their national programs for workers' compensation, ergonomics, as well as their occupational health programs. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to our discussions.
Awesome, thank you. And last but not least, Mr. Dr. Pitts. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Greg Pitts. I'm a private practitioner. I have 5 clinics, 50 employees. I specialize in upper extremity injuries. I've been with Toyota Motor Manufacturing for 28 years, on site for 20 years. The last 8 years, I've been doing primarily just consultation work and training. And I'm happy to be an ergonaut, and I look forward to this talk tonight, and I look forward to the panel. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thanks for joining us. And before we get started, I just wanted to make sure everyone knows our chat room is open for any questions that can be answered throughout our presentation or at the end for both attendees and panelists. Feel free to put any comments or questions in there. And then one more thing, just for attendees, again, just remember to be respectful to everybody here and their time, and just treat everybody with dignity and respect. And without any further ado, we'll give the floor to Mr. Albert Moore, who will now begin to share his screen. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing mine, and Mr. Moore can take over.
I'm trying. Let's see. Did it work?
Yes, sir. We got
Yes.
screen.
All right, good. So we're in business. So again, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking your time this evening to attend this mission control. The topic today is exoskeletons, their potential, progress, and the predicaments from my perspective. This is not intended to be a literature review per se, while there will be some discussions of articles, of course, but it's designed mainly to help people get a bigger picture and my take on exoskeletons, especially coming from doing research with them, and also as a certified industrial hygienist and a certified professional ergonomist in terms of the practical ends of these things. Like, okay, we have them, how are we going to use them, and what are some of the caveats for them? So to start off with just the basics, because I didn't know who all was going to be attending today, the exoskeleton can be defined in many ways, but a useful definition is that it's a wearable device that provides mechanical interaction that either augments, enables, assists, and or enhances physical activity. And these can be done via passive mechanisms or powered mechanicals. And this definition comes courtesy of the ASTM. And where are exoskeletons used? Well, they're in a variety of settings. One very important area is in the medical world, and that is doing very important work in helping people to reestablish movement, whether it has been from if they've suffered a stroke or or paralyzed or some other issues that can make a big difference in their quality of life. There are exoskeletons, of course, being used in the military, and who knows what some of those things would be. Don't hear too much about those things, probably for good reasons. Mainly, though, they are used in industry, and that's where the focus will be today, on exoskeletons and how they can be practically put to use to help solve real-world problems in production and deal with musculoskeletal disorders. And of course, there's some uses can be done for recreational purposes as well. And where are these exoskeletons used? Well, there are typically 4 areas. One would be the upper body, which is typically looking at the shoulder, but you can have things that work on wrists or thumbs or fingers. You have ones that help support the lower back. You have things for the lower body, for the legs. And then you can have devices that actually encompass the whole body, and these would be more powered units like Sarcos, where you can put this thing on and really lift tremendous amounts of weight that you couldn't with other types of devices. But these things aren't new. And when I've done a search on these older patents, you come across a variety of things. These are not the only ones, but these are the ones that are most well known. And you can see the dates of these things. They date back from 1890s, and there's something from before then. But this was designed to help with someone to be running or walking or jumping. And so the idea isn't new. What is new is our newfound interest in these things and our ability to construct these with different types of materials that were available in the past. And of course, we have different power sources for these things. But the reason those things were created and thought of in the past is the same reason that we're trying to do them today, is that we're trying to deal with the issue of musculoskeletal disorders. And I pulled this recent report from Liberty Mutual, and then I boxed in yellow the top things where it shows that, and this is something that happens across many years. This isn't an unusual year by any means for 2021 data, but that you can see that musculoskeletal type disorders are accounting for a huge proportion of the pain, suffering, and costs that are occurring from these particular types of injuries compared to others, such as slips and falls, or struck by or caught or falls, for instance. So this is a very costly and prevalent problem, and exoskeletons can be one way that we can help address these particular issues, but not the only. And here I include a reference. If people aren't familiar with this particular website, I would encourage them to go exploring, because I've included two screenshots here. One on the left is from their homepage, where they highlight some particular things that are worthwhile, like the prolific blogs they have, other issues that you can see that are kind of more general interest, kind of fun. But they also have a very practical side where they are gathering in one place information about various types of exoskeletons. And so here I've clicked on the one that shows me industrial exoskeletons, and it says there are 50 results, and it divides them out into arm support, back support, leg support, power gloves, etc. And then on the right-hand side, you can see further filtration if you want to go and explore some of these things. So this is a great resource, and if you're newer to exoskeletons, it's a wonderful place to start to really get a sense of the lay of the land. And that leads me to my first premise, is the potential of these devices. What do we think they could be capable of doing, and why? What's the carrot here? And one of the things that influenced my thinking a number of years ago was an article by John Howard and some of the co-authors from NIOSH, and that was talking about exoskeletons that could be a way to absorb what he called, or his authors called, the residual risk that's left over after you have introduced of course, the primacy of engineering controls. And another thing that he pointed out, which I think is extremely important, is that the adoption of these devices doesn't hinge only on the capability of these things. Of course, they have to show efficacy and that type of thing, but it really revolves around the level of trust that you can develop between the people who are trying to institute these things and the ones who are actually going to be tasked with using them. And we'll go back and visit that item of trust later. But to me, I think this is an absolutely overarching concern when you're trying to deploy exoskeletons. And the potential is that they can help address this tremendous workplace musculoskeletal disorder prevalence rate that we have, and deal with all those lost days of work, the low back pain and suffering, the shoulder disabilities, and then help us try to augment the strength that people have and mitigate the factors that could be contributing to the issues related to age. And we know Steve has talked about this a lot, about the overall rapidly aging workforce in the US, but this isn't just a US problem. It's happening. You can look in the stats for Italy, Germany, France, Korea, and especially China too. They were all facing this aging workforce, and exoskeletons may be a way to help us retain workers for longer. Now, there's something that we've all probably seen this and thought about it, heard of the hype cycle. but this comes from Gartner, and it's been around for a while, but I included it because this particular graphic, while it's got a lot of words on it, can be kind of busy, but I think if we start breaking it down, we can unpack it and see how it applies to exoskeletons in particular. So we had this in the lower left, this innovation trigger, which in our case spans back to the 1800s when people started realizing, oh, wow, we need to add these supports so people can do their work. And then this ramped up in the 20th century with our new technologies and curiosity for things to create these more or less first generation products. You have the things from GE in the 60s, early 70s. You have the plaid from Canada as one thing. And these started what could be considered, I guess, a virtuous cycle of curiosity and increased research into what is possible now, given today's materials that we have access to. And so that would produce these devices that would start to allow us to explore primarily in lab-based settings what could be possible for these things. And then as word gets out, you have, unfortunately, this peak of inflated expectations as typical of the hype cycle. So you have people start talking about these, they become more accessible in the popular press, and there may be not all the caveats revealed about how these exoskeletons actually work, because from my perspective, the key phrase is, it depends with these devices. Like, what's the context, what's it capable of doing, who's doing it, when, where, postures, all those types of things are very, very important, but they can get lost in translation when people are doing sound bites for press releases, etc. And so then that would lead, unfortunately, to this trough of disillusionment, where people start using these things and they're realizing that, you know, we've been suckered again. This isn't the best thing since sliced bread. It has caveats, and we didn't necessarily understand what they were before we jumped into the bandwagon and trying to use these things. And then that can cause people to reassess, potentially even to abandon these things if they had a bad experience with that. But there's still some intrepid people who haven't given up. They would keep looking at these things, especially as the second or third generation of these devices come out and people start making more rational decisions about how they actually could be benefiting them. And so they continue this adoption trend. And then that prompts people to think, okay, let's develop some methodologies and best practices around these things so that we're not going to be caught in this loop of this overselling, under-delivering, and then things just stop working. And ideally, then you would get to this virtuous portion where people are rationally taking these devices in, they're taking care to use them, and they really start reaping the benefits of these devices, and then it starts to spread in a positive way and can really reduce the issues at hand, which in this case would be musculoskeletal disorders and productivity and increased work capacity and all those types of things. So that leads us to this idea of the standards. And I included this graphic because it was in response to a whole series of questions ASTM was asking people about the value of doing standards. In this particular one, they were asking people what are their top 3 issues related to standards, what's important to them. And as you can see, when they did this, the word safety came to be the most prominent thing, followed by testing, evaluation, efficacy, performance, design, ergonomics, quality, side effects, reliability, scalability, all those things that I believe, even though this was published in 2020, are still very germane to our discussion related to exoskeletons. These things are probably on top of mind, not just only of the decision makers who are considering purchasing exoskeletons, but also on the people who are potentially going to be required to use them. And this gets back, I think, to this issue of what Howard was talking about in terms of trust. These devices need to do what they say they need to do, but they also have to be done in a context where people believe that's true, and those beliefs are positively reinforced with the way that they're actually rolled out. So that leads to hopefully some good progress. And in this case, there has been a proliferation of research articles worldwide on what these exoskeletons can potentially do. And there's been an explosion of various types of exoskeletons that are available, from the powered to the passive to the rigid to the more wearable kinds that are flexible. And there have been a lot of studies that show that it is possible that you can have metabolic reductions from using these devices. And it's also, there's also evidence from lab studies that you can reduce the muscle activation, especially for the shoulder and the low back under certain scenarios. But again, all of these things are under the caveat, it depends. What was this research experiment protocol? What were they trying to do? Who were the people doing it? What were the weights lifted? Where were they lifted from? What was the purpose? What was the pacing? All those things have to be considered, but there is hope that these things can actually make some difference in terms of people's exposure to musculoskeletal disorders. And here is a list of studies, and I watched Dr. Howard, from the director of NIOSH, give a presentation just the other day through the National Safety Council to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of Amazon's funded MSD lab, and he included this information. So I'm rebroadcasting that because I think it summed up the things that I thought were important as well in terms of studies. And you can look up these things. I'm not going to go down and line item what all these things are saying, but these were important studies to show that it is possible that you can have potential decreases in muscular activity from different types of scenarios with exoskeletons, so that there is this evidence that it is possible.
Hey, Albert.
Yes.
I have a question. So as you look at the research studies that are being done right now, is anybody looking at what is the reason that adoption or experimentation with exoskeletons in a commercial environment happening because they think they're going to prevent injury, or because they think they're going to increase output, throughput, or capacity of a particular, work activity? I think that, the capitalist system's amazing and employers are great, but I also often really wonder whether or not they care about whether or not their employees are getting hurt. And, are we, often treated as expendable resources? So, have any of the studies sort of compared the reasons why somebody's trying to use or introduce the exoskeleton technology into a worker line?
Well, your question is very germane, And there have been comments about that. But to answer your question directly, I'm not aware of a study that specifically looked at people's intention to use these things, whether they were solely trying to just to boost productivity and reduce costs, regardless of what it did in terms of the musculoskeletal disorder prevalency rates or severity impacts. I don't know if people have looked at it just like that. However, I can tell you that even from my own research, when I did 26 interviews with people, and these are people who were considering using exoskeletons. They were supervisors, so they had the power to actually acquire these devices and then make people use them. And one of the things that haunts me from one of the conversations I had with a supervisor is that he said that while they would like to make these things help people, he ended the conversation by saying, but at the end of the day, it all comes back around to money.
Mhm.
And he was very matter of fact about it. And that is true. I mean, you have to have profit to stay in business and keep people in jobs and all those types of things. But the way he presented it, he was like, you know, this was a tool for him to actually increase his return on investment in that way. There have been other studies where people have voiced concerns about, from the worker's perspective of, okay, you're giving me this device to augment my capacity, then are you then at the same time going to encourage me or require me to produce more, since I do potentially have more physical work capacity? And
Well, what I was thinking about, Albert, is that if one of the main problems with adoption is trust, is it potentially not that they distrust the device or the technology, but that they distrust the reason why they're being asked to use it? That there's an element there that it's a cultural issue as opposed to a technological issue that is causing the distrust.
Right. And I think the concept of distrust cuts across all facets of environmental health and safety concerns, because people have historically been concerned about what they're breathing or what they're touching or those types of things. And do they believe the employer when they're saying that this really is a non-hazardous thing or not? I think that's an historical problem that is unfortunately still not resolved. And so I think that can really be idiosyncratic to a particular organization, maybe a particular unit of a section, to supervisors, things like that have taken to heart Deming's approach of the benefits of driving out fear in your workplace, and allowing people to really develop and be invested in improving the quality and productivity of their workplace for long-term value for all stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
But that is not necessarily a universally shared view. But that's an excellent point.
Matthew just posted a note on the chat, and I think it's
Yes.
a great point about culture for being a big part of adoption.
Oh yeah, I think it is a very critical component that needs a lot more study on that. A paper that I'm working on right now and will be submitting soon, it delves into that topic of adoption and specifically looking at the splinters that can happen along the lines of gender, what that can mean for adoption and intention to use. And then those are like the short-term things. And we know that musculoskeletal disorders are usually not things that are acute. I mean, you can have an acute injury if you lift something and you really, pull that ligament, strain that tendon, or rip that muscle. That can happen. But usually these things are a little more subtle than that, and they take longer to develop and detect, and then to see whether your inputs are actually making a difference. And so this is one of the first studies from colleagues at Virginia Tech, Sung Kim and all, who did this long-term study of looking at the effectiveness of an exoskeleton for overarm use for a period of 18 months. So collected data at various times, and they were looking to see what, if anything, was happening in terms of people's acceptance, their incident rates, and things like that. And in this particular result, there were no statistically significant differences between MSDS symptoms between the user and non-user groups, although there was some suggestions that it reduced their symptoms in the wrist, neck, and shoulder, which are all good signs. But again, this study may not be still yet long enough to know whether these things have how good their efficacy is in terms of dealing with rates of MSDS. But one good thing it said, there was no adverse effect in safety right away from the user group. And that in terms of perception, the productivity was that it was slightly better at 1 month of the study than before. So there would be this learning. And that's the other thing with exoskeletons, is that since many of these studies are done short-term in the lab, there is some potential confounding factors of the learning impact of using these devices. How long, how many repetitions, how many cycles, how many days, hours, weeks does it take for someone to adapt to a particular exoskeleton and the settings that it offers to get the absolute most benefit from the device on an individual basis? And to me, that's still like an open question. And there's ongoing research to answer that. And the other thing here is that there was acceptance, and it was consistent over time and across the facilities for these things. So that means that people were, I guess, essentially giving them the benefit of the doubt. They were open to trying these things to see if it would help, which I think is acknowledgement that the fact that that you've tried many other activities to reduce these MSDS risks, and this may be one of the last things that are available. So let's see what happens when we try this. People can be open to that. Which leads then to some of things that I call predicaments. And that is, okay, where are we in our understanding and utilization of these devices? And there was a recent summative article, systematic review, I guess I should call it, from Zhu et al. And it listed a whole number of active and passive exoskeletons and how they're used and what some of the findings were of these studies. And if you're not in the habit of reading a lot of research papers, I would encourage you to at least seek out the ones that are billed as systematic reviews, because these usually occur every several years, and they pull together all kinds of studies from different places and give you a good snapshot of what we know about these things. So you don't have to keep reading, constantly reading. You can come back and then just check these main findings. And then they give you a whole host of studies that you can then, of course, read yourself to get more details on it, especially if it's an area that of exoskeleton use that you're considering. But the second item on this list of predicaments is something that is an ongoing problem, and that is with gender. Historically, females have been really underrepresented in studies. In the one systematic review that Toulouse did in 2016, when I counted it up, I think there were about 70% of all the participants in all the studies that he had collected were male. And while currently there are many studies that are gender balanced, and from my institution, we, where possible, do try to offer gender-based, gender-balanced studies, it's still not universal. That you're still finding that there are more male data than female data, and that can be cause all kinds of issues because of the variance response. In the paper that I'm currently analyzing and writing, I'm finding actually what I would deem asymmetric responses to gender and exoskeleton use, and I've been quite surprised by the extent of that. In a more recent study by Medine, they were looking at the torque profiles of these exoskeletons, and historically, torque profiles are not necessarily things that the manufacturers are disclosing to people. So you may not know exactly how this device is going to respond to the different weights that you're putting on it. Many devices have controls so you can somewhat modify the level of support you're getting or at what point that support activates, but you may not have the exact numbers, which could have impact in terms of how well that this device is helping you lift what you're lifting. Is it enough or is it not enough? Or it could also cause confounding issues in terms of training people to use the different settings that are available. And then another recent study found that the exoskeleton could have impacts on how the trunk is actually controlled. It could cause perturbations in how the muscles are essentially like co-contracting and working together. And while it may not be exactly clear what that means in terms of risk or increase or decrease, it's still something that it is a potential concern that when you're adding this device, you are changing how people are actually functioning inside the trunk. And then the last area that I listed here is a predicament, and that is with user acceptance and the corollary of intention to use. And this is an area that I think needs a lot more investigation in terms of what people find acceptable, unacceptable, and I didn't include it in this, but there was a brand new article from Theoretical Perspectives of Ergonomics on comfort and discomfort. And it was a very interesting model about the multidimensionality of what discomfort is and how it impacts people's perception and use of not only of exoskeletons, but of other things. And that's an area that I think needs to be further explored. And here are some studies that Dr. Howard actually called out in his presentation as ones that address these types of things. And the one from El Prama was about how much effort that people would expect to exert to use one of these things, and how the interaction of what their effort perception is to actually how they intend to use this. And of course, that would also work with the social influence relative to these things. And also, another study found that acceptance was related to how the exoskeleton appears, or how people's self-perception is when they're wearing one of these things, how attractive it is or not, and then how socially accepted it is. And that's what, in my own research, I found something very similar to that there were strong components of that, and these are actually gender mediated. And then Kim et al. Found that that the perceived usability, comfort, and performance were determinants of use intention. And so these are things that, as people work with these devices and try to deploy them, need to be very mindful of. These are like the psychosocial components of things that are really related to trust. And there needs to be a lot more studies of these in larger populations, especially in multicultural settings, different countries, as to what that means. Because people may have different views on how well they fit in or not fit in using these things, and how much comfort they're willing to take or discomfort, and how much effort they expect to put into these devices, and how their expectations are being managed for these. And I included this one because Dr. Howard listed these studies. He basically had a call to action, and I just wanted to put that out here in this forum to echo that if you are doing an exoskeleton study or planning on doing an exoskeleton study, I would encourage you to reach out to NIOSH and get connected to them. So then what you're doing may be folded into some of the questions that they're actually trying to address, and that it can be done in such a way that it expands the knowledge for everybody. So your efforts are going to be multiplied. And then finally, I wanted to make people aware of this particular group, the committee of F48 on exoskeletons and exosuits. This organization has been around, as it says, since 2017, and it seemed to have gotten a slow start, because it was like, okay, people are the forming, norming, storming type of things as groups get going, but they have really accelerated their output. And I would encourage you to go to their website and look at all the different types of standards that they are now currently offering, ranging from how you would do some of your design work, how you would then note the settings that the users are making for the exoskeletons and tracking those types of things, to among all kinds of things. So this should be one of your first places that you go if you're considering using exoskeletons, is to see, okay, what have people already done, so you don't have to reinvent a checklist or scratch your head and think about all these what if scenarios. You can go here and take advantage of all the thinking that's gone into this to help make exoskeletons be something that are more easily integrated into the working world. And I want to close out by returning to this AREC concept that I mentioned in the previous podcast. I didn't show the picture of it there, but I wanted to break it down because I think this really links in this idea of trust, ergonomics, and then this idea of it depends. So we should always be anticipating and recognizing the hazards that are there, whether they're ergonomic or not, and then evaluate what those exposures are, and then control them. And that's what the hierarchy of controls has traditionally done. But with this AREC framework, they're adding in consciously to tell you to confirm that the protection you thought you were offering is actually there, and that it's also continuing to be protective as things have changed. And it breaks it down into these three different triangles that must be built and sustained to keep everything running. So you have to have things that are connected, protected, and that are respected. You have the leaders that are part of the cultures that make the system, that all have to be working smoothly. And then you have to make sure the experience is appropriate, that you're providing the appropriate tools, and of course the training that's necessary to make all of these things work. And then it maps onto this hierarchy. In this case, they've chosen to flip it upside down, which highlights the place where exoskeletons would be positioned. And there's some discussion as to whether these are personal protective equipment devices or tools or maybe something else even. But you can see that whatever you would call them, they would go towards the top of this upside down triangle, so that where they are going to be least effective. And when you're working in this area, because you haven't done this elimination, substitution, necessarily a modification, that there may be multiple hazards that are still present, not just ergonomic concerns when you're trying to implement the exoskeleton. So you need to make sure that you're stepping back and pulling in your industrial hygiene perspective and your other safety perspectives, and seeing, okay, what are the potential hazards that are in the context of this device, and what are those potential negative interactions when you're wearing the exoskeleton, and be very, very mindful of those things. And then constantly going back and doing, as it says, the retrospective, contemporaneous, and prospective assessment opportunities to do these modifications, substitutions, and eliminations that you may not have been able to do before because things change. And this also leaves me with the final word that I used before in the podcast, and that is on this sustainability scale you see on your left. It goes from something that is sustainable, which should mean that it's more of a permanent solution, and so that you can be more assured that it's actually going to have a long-term positive impact, all the way up to something that's less sustainable. And the strong term that they choose here is precarious. And I think that word captures a lot of things, because again, it depends on what is happening in the environment as to how effective your controls are going to be. So you should always keep in mind that what you have solved today may not be the solution for tomorrow, because things would change. You always need to be on the lookout for those things, and be very active, being engaged with the users, engaged with the developers, the designers, all the other stakeholders, to make sure that what you intend is actually occurring in terms of people's health and safety for that. So that concludes my take on how these things fit in the context of general environmental health and safety work. So I'm counting on people on the panel, since you have a lot of varied perspectives, to share your thoughts, things that you have connected here, things that you realize that maybe we haven't talked about yet that we should, or other comments. I'd like to hear what you're thinking.
I just want to start off by saying thank you, Mr. Moore. That was a great presentation. We appreciate your time. And yeah, there's definitely people here with questions, both panelists and attendees that have been waiting to ask in the chat. So we'll let them go ahead.
Please.
Ray, if you're referring to me, I'm going to start it off. Sure.
Yes.
I just wanted to say, yeah, okay. So I'm Victoria Burico. I'm from AIHA Science and Technology. We are developers of exoskeletons. So I'm on the developer side of the things. I'm also participating in ASTM 48. It's been already 5 years I'm on that. I'm leading the safety task group. And I'm very, very grateful for you showcasing some of the work that comes from ISTM 48 and the Center of Excellence. Thank you. Thank you. We need to broadcast that stuff. We've been working very hard, as Rita, our colleague, mentions as well in chat. And I'm sure Rita is going to speak up as well in a minute. I just want to reassure you that on ISTM 48, we're doing everything that there is possible to do to address many of the questions or all of the questions you have addressed, including safety, performance, intent of use, the role of management. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of discussions. We would love to have you on board. I think that is the main message. And when I say we would love to have you on board, we would love to have Albert Bohr more on board, as well as Kirby, Nichol, Steve, LaNiesha, Ray as well, and Greg. We need people like you. We actually really need people like you because we just need to get the discussion going. Right? You asked the right questions. I love the question that Nichol has asked. Those are fantastic questions. And that's what we do in ASTM. We just keep on asking them and just not sleep until we find a way to answer these in standards. So I'm just inviting you, please join us. And I mean, you don't have to be there all the time. If you show up once a month, if you show up once a year, it's good enough. Just please show up from time to time because we need people like you.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Sounds very exciting.
Yeah,
I'll take you up on it.
And we have your contact information, which I'll make sure to pass along. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Rita, your turn.
Yeah, no, I'm good. But as far as ASTM F48 and joining the committees, if you reach out, send me an email, and I will do an email introduction with Nora, who is the keeper of getting people on board. I do also want to thank you for quoting one of the studies that my team conducted for the Exoskeleton Technology Center of Excellence. So I do appreciate having the work within this group recognized. Now, one of my main issues, however, is creating a balance between ergonomists and other professionals that are not ergonomists. Because right now, part of the discussions that are being had with regard to adoption of technology has been really focused on ergonomist work. And it has not been balanced out by that other piece that Nichol brought up when she asked about culture. And the culture and the politics are going to be defined depending on the industry that you're talking about. The culture, when you're dealing with the shipyards or you're dealing with manufacturing, different types of manufacturing, and you have to deal with unions, that is going to highly impact adoptability and implementability of exoskeletons, gender issues. So all of that falls under the category whenever I give lectures on adopting technology, I go back to the Holy Trinity: politics, policy, and science, of which science is the one that matters the least. You can have all the best data in the world, you can have the best technology in the world, and there is a graveyard where all the greatest ideas and innovations on the planet go to die. and money is the number one factor. And then all the others follow. So in addition to the professionals here in this group, and I'd love to know more about what the Ergonauts do, I would also ask you to reach out to some of your other colleagues that help balance out your perspectives as ergonomists, but also the people who work on the applied side of the house that have to be buying the technologies, that have to be using the technologies, that turn to you for your advice and assistance and using things properly and correctly so that they don't hurt people and that they can serve a purpose, but also the consumers of the technology so that we can help balance out more the type of professionals that are joining ASTM F48. And thank you all very much. So those are my parting words. Help us find some more people. Over.
Thank you, Rita.
Very good. Very good comments. One of the things that that helps me with this is leaning on my systems engineering background and thinking about how interrelated everything can be and looking at explicitly those things that are creating the negative and positive feedback loops that make or break implementation. You can look at an example of some of my thinking in the cover story for April Synergist. I had done, there was a DEI article, and I created a systems map that talked about how DEI initiatives can foster or fail based on a whole variety of parameters. And I based that off of originally Dr. Howard's idea of this residual risk, about how then you have certain controls, and then when you look at a particular issue that you're trying to deal with, what are the factors that impinge upon that? So I would encourage you to look at that article to get a sense of a systems perspective on this concept.
Yes, sir. Will do.
Albert, I want to thank you, Albert. I thought it was an excellent presentation. You had a lot of great. It was comprehensive and it was very detailed. I had a lot of good common sense stuff involved, as well as good research questions, and you provide us with good research to go look up. You know, my question is, are you aware of any research that actually looks at production, quality, and the safety benefits, all three together, as it relates to exoskeletons? Because I think everybody on the panel and everybody that's on this call understands that that's what drives industry, is production and quality, safety being a byproduct using the exoskeleton. Because that's what's going to drive your culture. It's what's going to drive your selection. That's what's going to drive what happens on the floor. If you put exoskeleton in place and it impedes production or quality, they're not going to use it. The point made about the gender, my experience has been that the selection of adaptation to an environment, usually an environment that cannot be adapted. In other words, you've got somebody working overhead or large reach envelopes for long periods of time. You can't engineer it out, so you have to do it. And the exoskeleton is a nice bridge, but the gender bias is there because the majority of people doing these extremely difficult tasks, that are overhead or large reach envelopes or heavy lifting, are males versus females on the average. And so therefore you get a gender bias in place, where I think the exoskeletons can actually bridge the gap and allow more females to work in these environments and actually help make it more uniform. But the problem is that all the research is being done and all the data is being collected on males because of this bias being towards the jobs that require large reach envelopes, overhead activity. So I know I've asked a lot and said a lot, but the bottom line is the presentation was good. But is there research out there that demonstrates production quality and injury control with exoskeletons?
Well, I can tell you of, I can't get in specifics now because it's not gone for the final peer review and to be impressed. But the one a lab study that I did particularly assess a particular measure of productivity and what that means in terms of exoskeleton use. And I think it's a metric that can be utilized successfully to help answer some of these questions.
Awesome.
Awesome.
If
Now,
I,
if we could,
can I really quickly interject? I
Sure.
put it in the comments there, Greg. There are several studies that are ongoing. The automotive industry has been conducting a 5-year longitudinal study, and productivity is part of it, to the point that Toyota has actually institutionalized in one of their production processes the implementation and use of, I believe they used the levitate because they went from X number of injuries to 0. So they have been conducting several studies. However, they do not publish or share that information outside of the AEXG, which is the Automotive Industry Working Group. Another great case is to talk to Wapaka Foundries. They have adopted the use of the BioServo iron hand, and they have extensive information on how that has improved on their productivity, to the point where they're actually briefing in Congress right now and on Capitol Hill to be able to come up with policies that actually support the implementation of use of exoskeletons such as that one. So there are several out there, they're just not widely published.
Okay,
But they're not ignored, particularly when we're dealing with manufacturing. Over.
so
If I
Rita,
may add,
I'm sorry, but just for housekeeping, Rita, you said you put that in the chat, and is Ray, is that something that you can collect and then
yes, sir.
make an addendum for everybody so we can add to this broadcast later?
Yes, sir. So I'll have the chat and all that great information will be able to be looked at later as well. So
Okay, thank you very
I would
much.
like to
I have
add
to
that
ask a
information.
question due to time. Hi,
Yep.
sorry, I have to just due to time, I had a comment to make and then a question for Mr. Moore. First and foremost, I have the exact same sentiment as everybody. Had a great presentation. The comment I wanted to make, I also dropped a link to a study in the chat. Nichol made a point about what are the motivators for different stakeholders, and Cambridge released a study that talked about large scale deployment, and it had a matrix within it that showed the different stakeholders. So from policymakers to ergonomists to therapists to safety. So I think that's a good reference to look at in reference to that question. And then my question for Mr. Moore, as it relates to, say, lab studies and field studies, what have you seen to be not only successful, but have statistically significant results, but also what were their successful methodologies for those studies that did have statistically significant results? What have you observed to see the successful methodology on how they deployed exoskeletons within their organizations?
So you're talking about replicating the efficacy of a lab-based study in a field study, or field study efficacy and also lab-based, where I'm not certain I exactly get your question.
So to be honest, either one, simply because they both exist, both types of studies, and I know they give different results, but whichever study that you saw that was successful, what were their methodologies that they leveraged to get those successful results for their deployment plan?
Well, in the lab studies, what enhances the success is the various types of controls to enhance the validity of these things, the internal validity of those studies, which though then in contrast can reduce the generalizability of those data, because you had controlled so much that you may not be able to say that this result would happen in another setting with slightly broader parameters. You may not be able to make that leap, but you can get a good idea that if in these situations, these are the most likely outcomes for things.
Okay. So within the lab, then which is the validity is great and the control is great, but you can't apply it to the field studies because did have more control. So what have you seen within the field component on who had successful results and how they reached their results? What
May I
were
get
those
involved in
generalized?
this? Would you accept, Mr. Moore, if I just give a little bit of information to LaNiesha?
Go ahead. Sure.
Okay, so last year they have made a longitudinal study in Ford of upper limb exoskeleton, and one significant result that they have seen is there were less, the users who were using exoskeletons, they were seeing less or requiring less assistance from the occupational medic agents to resolve their shoulder long-term injury symptoms, right? So shoulder fatigue and discomfort and elements like that. So that was one promising result that they were seeing. And there was a significant element to it. I don't know if that answers to your question, because that also links to the return on investment. When we speak about return on investment, we shouldn't look just at the productivity. We should also look at how many people are having injuries, how many people are seeking medical attention on the floor, on the production floor. And Ford and Toyota have demonstrated that there were less people having complaints, having needing days off, sick days, after using upper limb exoskeletons.
Which I think leads to the very importance of devising these leading metrics. And I think that would count as one of those things where people have reduced need for external care and their symptoms have gone down. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have reduced severity or reduced long-term prognosis for developing an MSD, but that could be an indication that we're moving in the right direction.
So if I can just jump in, I think it's just important for us to know what those successful results were, but it's even more important to know how people reach them. And the type of methodology I'm speaking to is first recognizing the need for exoskeletons, then understanding what brand might be most relevant to this population and the work that they're doing, then understanding, well, what is that communication plan? What kind of interviews, what kind of quality control are you doing to see the efficacy for it? So I think understanding not only the success of it, but how people reach that level of success is just as important. And I'm going to take that upon myself to do even more research and reading to learn, because if you're going to be in the field doing it, you need to know that framework and methodology.
And LaNiesha, you are,
so if you don't mind me interrupting.
Okay, go ahead, Ruth.
Yeah, LaNiesha, I support the Army on some of the work that they're doing and cataloging exoskeletons by task and coming up with the metrics on why you would choose certain exoskeletons under certain conditions and whatnot is work that we have that we're preparing and we're ongoing. And I'm always looking for consultants to add on to our team because we don't have enough people to get the work done. So every once in a while, we're always looking for other people. So, and I put this in the chat also very quickly, companies such as Verve Motion and HeroWare did not come to the market without doing exactly what you're talking about. And in the case of Verve Motion, Ignacio Galeana came out of the Harvard VEAS research group with Connor Walsh, and working in collaboration with Spalding, with Dr. Paolo Bonato, and they also worked with the University of Rome in a collaborative effort. So the Verve Motion product, when you see it out there, that actually came from a 5-year Net Warrior, NETT Warrior program that the Army was funding. So it started as an Army program, and then it spun off into a company, and they are selling their product like hotcakes. HeroWare, the same thing. Dr. Carl Zellick started the same type of analysis and study. They also did the same type of comparative analysis. He also has his own metrics, the metrics that he has designed. They're very similar. We just don't have them standardized yet. We don't have standardized test methods yet, as Victoria was saying. That's in the queue to be done. But there are 2 very successful companies right now that have actually followed what you are talking about. And there is extensive literature out there. What they cannot do is publish their numbers because they are their corporate proprietary data. Can they eventually publish their methodologies, etc.? We're working on getting them to share with us what can be incorporated into standards and test methods. But their actual corporate data on how they actually did the lab versus in-field, that's tight-hold information. Now the Army, the U.S. Army Natick Soldier Center that I retired from, they've been doing this for almost 100 years. So there's quite a bit of information out there. It's just a matter of knowing where to find it. And we have extensive bibliography, so if you reach out, more than happy to share it with you. Over.
And then just
Thank
in
you.
case, LaNiesha, if just in case you do speak French,
Me?
there is a French national standards development organization called AFNOR. In July, there is a standard that is going to be published on exoskeletons that speaks exactly to your point, that before deploying exoskeletons, you need to do the work analysis, understand what are the troubles, understand what is your workforce, find the solution that responds to that problem and that fits your workforce, deploy in a small amount in a pilot study, see what are the results, see what is the acceptance level, and if it's successful, then deploy it large.
Could you provide the name of that particular organization, please?
I can absolutely provide and the name of the organization and the name of the standard. I'm going to put it on chat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, looks
Let
like
me jump in a sec if you don't mind. I think Rita said earlier she wanted to know more about Ergonauts at some point, and this is not an infomercial. This is this was by design. I put in my initial, I was the one who wrote it, that exoskeletals applications in the infancy. I work with hundreds of ergonomists. Actually, I think Albert's the one told me this, there's less than 1,000 actual CPEs that are working in the US. What our intention is we're experts at taking very complex processes, and we are going to break it down as not as a standout, it'll be a standout module. We modularize our learning, and what we're going to do is we're going to train the masses, because we are in infancy from an application perspective. We're going to train an army of people to conduct these evaluations, and I'm talking about general industry, construction, those kind of things. We've already got that platform built for that. I know Albert, he's went through it, and he saw what we do in application. So anyway, that's what I meant is from a ergonomist perspective and the people within our community, what are the markers for applications, those kind of things. It's just going to be part of a job assessment with the technology we got coming out. But that's that's what we're going to do, is we're going to train a lot of people to be able to conduct assessments, and not just in that, but it'll be part of what they're doing is we remove barriers, and we use the same lean techniques that Toyota uses to put a Camry off the end of the production line over 56 seconds. That's what our group does. The other thing too is I wanted to, I haven't heard anything out of him, but Kirby, if you're still on, I'd like to get you to chime in. Kirby's actually probably the premier lean ergonomist in the US. And that's on the construction side. There's this, he's a voice that people really need to listen to. And I work in this area, but Kirby, if you don't mind, just a couple words on your observations.
Well, I'm not sure I can live up to that introduction right there.
It's true.
Well, I will say, like I said, I worked 37 years as an ergonomist, basically, with their mutual insurance company. And of course, I was an industrial specialist. And I'm going to be just totally honest with you, I don't think I've ever run across any kind of job or any kind of company that really was worth working with exoskeletons. You know, of course, one of the things I would do was, you know, and I thought I would have the greatest ergonomic solution in the world. And then I come up and I'd introduce it to the field and to the managers and to the people out there, and just flopped, even though I thought it was a good idea. And it probably was. But I think it's like you're saying, it was a hard sell and they weren't buying it. One of the things, and I heard someone earlier say that the trifecta includes like politics and there's, I can't remember the other ones, but in ergonomics there's also a trifecta. There's three things associated with ergonomics. One's the physical, and a lot of the physical things as far as how much can a person lift, how often and how long can they go doing things. And the other part, and they're all equal, but another part is the cognitive portion of it is where do they understand how to do the job? Do they understand how to use the equipment? Do they understand the purpose of things and doing things? And then the third part, which I think gets not as much attention, and it should, but I think it's the one that I have seen over the years with a lot of different companies where everything is equal at all the different operations that you go to. And the difference is this, the third part, which is the psychosocial. And there's a lot of pieces that go into that. I could do a presentation on that just in itself. And Steve, you've heard it. That presentation, but the psychosocial goes into the organizational of the organization, the training part, the communication part, the follow-up part. But basically, then the psychosocial is also part of that deal where does the employee like what he does? Does he like working for the company? Does he like or she likes the manager? And there's all that cultural part that y'all are talking about, but the manager can make and break that. And that's where I think a lot of the top educational part should be on a lot of that. Albert, I thought that your presentation was very good also, and you hit a lot of key points, but I think everybody's coming back to that buy-in thing. And like I said, I've not really worked with exoskeletal, but I've worked with a lot of tools and things that we brought into workspaces, and it costs the company a lot of money to put those things in, and then all of a sudden they're not being used. Slows them down. It's hurting production. The people just don't like it. They'd rather do it manually. So and there's really a lot of what you're talking about with ergonomics can be extremely complicated with a lot of the human people and the human factor that you have involved with it. But there's a lot of pieces to ergonomics. Did I kind of touch on stuff?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. We work in same industry. I know, and it comes back to culture, when the companies accept it, when they understand it, it's an educational process, but there's just not enough people doing what we do, to conducting evaluations that say, okay, this is a perfect opportunity for an application. I mean, it's just something that there's a few people know, but we need thousands of people conducting evaluations. This is the magnitude of the problem, and the time's running out. If you look at it from a boomer's perspective, 2030 is a magic. It's just math, but the boomers are gone. The boomers are, they're all 68 years old, 67, 68 years old. And so
we hope they're not gone. They're just out of the workforce. Perhaps.
Okay.
There's a few of them on the phone that don't want to be gone.
Yeah, me either. Yeah. So, but one more thing, Ashley Bauer had a question earlier for you, Albert. How customizable were most of the Exos you've worked with?
How customizable?
Yep.
Well, from the ones that I've used, the manuals didn't come with clear anthropometric guidelines in terms of what portions they would fit in terms of like the torso length, the leg, arm, or those types of things. That information was not really available. So you had to try to tailor things as much as possible. And I even had in my lab experiment, I actually had to turn some participants away because the device simply just could not be adjusted to fit them, which is very unfortunate.
Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt. Which ones were they? What year, which model? Were they still prototypes? Are they commercial available systems?
The ones that I was using were commercially available systems at the time. I think there've been another model version of these things, so I'm not certain how
What
much
year?
additional adjustability. This one would have been around a 2019 model.
Oh, yeah. So, and just to be respectful of everybody's time and my own, I am on no exoskeleton payroll. I do not sell exoskeletons for a living. I am not an ergonomist. I'm not even a scientist. I'm a political science major and I am a business developer. And my job is to create the multidisciplinary teams to help the Army solve the complex problems that have to do with exoskeletons. And I can guarantee you that several of the exoskeletons since 2019 have actually made it into the market and are very successful. So it all depends on what the particular task you were looking at, your gender, which model. Was it a prototype? Was it commercially available? Was it first generation, second generation? And that's why you won't have a lot of that information associated with those products, but many of them, I just saw that Matt Marino is here on the group. Matt Marino is one of the premier and most recognized ergonomists and occupational and safety people on the F48 team, and also worked for and with the HeroWare product. So he has a lot of experience on putting the care and feeding type of manuals that go with with this kind of product. The same can go with Victoria, who's on the line. She's a designer. She's not an ergonomist, but Matt is. And so it all depends on what you were testing the product, how you were testing it. Did you use one of the nascent standardized test methods? Another person who does, not an ergonomist, but has ergonomist on his team is Adam Norton, and he is located at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. He has done extensive research with exoskeletons of all types and developing test methods. So I'm not questioning your work, by the way. You have to get through your work in order to be able to get your degree, and that's commendable. But I do have to caveat that it all depends which product, under which conditions, and what year it was. And I can tell you right now, I have several in our office. We have several different models of the same company. And they're very different as far as the fitting process, as far as the bells and whistles that go associated with it. A great company to actually take a look at their evolution is Autobach and the Autobach products and the Sudex products. And so, so all these different companies, even the ones that are still in prototype and haven't made it out to the market, they do have ergonomists and biomechanists on their team. So just wanted to make that very clear. I have been seeing exoskeletons since 1996. I was there when the Sarcos product made it out of the DARPA program, and you probably needed a nuclear power plant to be able to power that puppy when it came out. I've known them since they even started the company. So I can tell you a lot of these exoskeletons, they've made it to market for a reason. One of the main issues, and that's going to be my last food for thought, is the fact that we do not yet, there's still more work to be done. I'm not going to deny that. And we can't work fast enough on F48. That said, exoskeletons are making a difference. Implementation and adoption is a problem. They have not become mainstream, and this is all mostly due to the fact that people do not know what exoskeletons are. There is no such thing as a market or an industry called exoskeletons, and that's something that needs to happen. People need to know what they are.
We got your back, Rita.
I hope so, because you have no idea how many hours I've been spending in Congress also talking to people and banging on doors. So yeah, there's still a lot of work to do, but we just need to get the word out there. And thank you so much, Mr. Moore. When I heard your podcast, I was very interested in your story, in your personal story. I always like to know who the person is first before I listen to how many titles they have or how much they know. I'd rather know first who you are, what you do, what makes you tick, your family values, and I found your personal story very interesting. So thank you for having shared that and for inviting us here tonight. Over.
Thank you for your continued work on this topic. I really appreciate that long-term view you have taken.
Well, Ray, are there any other outstanding questions that we want to talk about? We certainly have gone over and we lost LaNiesha, which is understandable from a time perspective, but we do want to be respectful of folks' time. Is there any outstanding questions?
I don't see any on my end. We answered.
Yeah, I have one. Why long term? I think this is a little bit what we're trying to reassure you about. With the work that is done in STM, with the research that is coming out, with the field studies, with all the new knowledge that we're gaining, I do understand. I'm from the producer's side of the house. I am an ergonomist. And when I say I'm an ergonomist not just by title. I'm an ergonomist at heart. I like speaking with blue collars. I like understanding what they need. And the one thing that makes me tick is knowing that today we are developing and we're producing an object, a technology that I have already seen blue collars thank me for and saying that my shoulder doesn't hurt, my back doesn't hurt, and thanking me for it. I am just curious to understand, why are you saying this is long-term? In my mind, it's happening right now. We are now launching a big production because the encouragement that we've been getting from firsthand from the workers, well, it makes me happy. It makes me smile. It encourages me. And it makes me think that, okay, the last 7 years that we spent in developing this thing, we weren't just dreaming. It makes perfect sense. The workers need it, they beg for it, they try it, they love it, they thank us for it. Do you really think it's long-term, and why?
Was that to Albert?
Yeah.
Yeah, to Albert. And as well, if the panelists also share Albert's opinion that it's long-term, why? Why are you not assured that it's today? Is it based on a prototype from 5 years ago that you have tried? And I acknowledge, yeah, 5 years ago we were not there.
No, I think my intention for the when I use the word long term is that it was talking about your sustained efforts in building out this product and perfecting it, and then prototyping it, and then field testing it, and then getting the solid evidence that it actually does take people's pain away and improves their productivity. And then from there, it is this effort to consistently advertise and market and grow. And that's the long-term part, where you have to keep this investment to become this, so you get to that virtuous cycle of the plateau of productivity and the hype cycle. That's what we're trying to get to, where it takes off and it becomes something that many people would say is just self-evident, that you must include in your tools that you provide people.
Okay, well, that reassures me, Albert. And here is where I'm gonna go back to Naisha's comment. The product is great. The implementation process is very important. You can't just buy one. You can't just buy one and throw it on in the field. You know, maybe in a year or two, the product is gonna be even more mature and we'll be able to do that. But I just encourage you to think about it as a bike that has just appeared. There is no parent to teach you how to use the bike. You need to learn how to balance on it, and you just need support to know how to balance on it. That's all you really need. Because if there is not the guy who's going to hold it just a little bit to let you take off, you won't understand the idea of what it does. And if you have any questions about it, and if you wish to help us, please join F48.
You know what I'm reminded of when you
yeah.
talk about that? What I'm reminded of is the movie Hidden Figures, which was about it was that point in time when NASA was getting its first supercomputer, right? And you had this group of amazing women who did the mathematical calculations, and they started using the computer, and they still were better than the computer when they first started, right? But by the end, even by the end of that movie, they had already made the technological adoption and advancement that their jobs changed dramatically. And I feel like this conversation kind of dances around some of the same topics that we go through this with any technological adoption, right? There is a period of time when it is not well accepted, but it still is showing improvement and promise. And then eventually it will, it will win over and things will change, but there's always that adoption cycle that has to be dealt with. But it just reminded me of that moment in that movie when they realized that, they were getting rid of the human computers, right? Because they were going to be able to actually reliably run the statistics on the IBM. So.
Yeah, and Nicole, and this is why basically what we need as well on the field, okay, in the standards world, we need all the stakeholders that Rita was speaking about, and not just in the standards, in the society, to make this a solid industry and to make sure that the product actually helps and isn't just designed in vain. But also on the field, we need ergonomists like Matt Marino, who, I don't know if he's still online, he was online. Matt has done fantastic work on the field. We need ergonomists like you, who accompany the users, right? Who accompany not just the users, who also accompany the buyers. There are a lot of companies that lack ergonomists. They think that they can just buy something off the shelf and throw it in. And we need ergonomists who help them and accompany them. And as Naisha was saying, understanding what are the needs, choosing the right exo, telling the user, okay, this exo is done for that. This is what you can expect of it. Following up with the user and just accompanying. That's it. And I'm not saying all exos that are out there today are great. I'm just saying there are a bunch of fantastic exos out there. The reasons that we're working so hard on the standards is like kind of skimming it out and making sure that there are no bad products being put, or finding a way to create certifications and to say, okay, this exo is all right. This exo did not pass the test. We're working on that, but we also need you guys.
Yeah, those are great points. Thank you. Ray, were there any other outstanding questions?
No, I think that was it. And we appreciate everyone coming, and I'll leave it with Steve to talk about sponsors. And once again, Mr. Moore, thank you for doing this with us.
Welcome, my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Albert, very much. And thank you all for asking the questions. That's what this is about. We didn't think we knew it all. We want answers, and we want to participate and help from that perspective. But yeah, we got some folks, and these are favorite products. These are not We don't put everybody up here, but yeah, a company called Super Feet. They have an amazing footbed product. It's OTC, over the counter. Orthotic lily pad. They have literally solved one of the at-home office products. It's a great desk. Commonwealth Physical Therapy or Hand Therapy. That's Greg Pitz's company. He's got, I think, 5 clinics again. Then Ergo Office. That's our platform for the Ergonauts. Atomic Ergo, and I guess most of you know that. I hope that is our that's our podcast. Company called Mousetrapper. They're a Swedish company. They make a sweet little keyboard that we love. And then there's Ohm Seating, which is Office Master. I'm actually sitting in an Office Master. It's a great one. The one that didn't make it up there, but we'll post it online, is KLEM Consulting, which is Kirby's company. And I'm telling you, he's a fantastic ergonomist. Reach out to him if you have anything that you want done that's complex. He's your guy. He can do all the simple stuff, but the complex ones, he's really good with that. So anyway, that's all I've got. And then we have LaNiesha's company is iHealth 360. She's just launching it, and it's an amazing little company. So anyway, that's all I have. Appreciate everybody showing up and hanging around. And this is the first one we've got others. I've actually had several people reach out since we posted this initially and PM me and said, hey, you know what, anything we can do to help. And I'm going to take people up on it. It's about education. That's our mission, is about education. So that's all I have.
Thank you. And again, thanks everyone for being here.
everyone.
Mr. Moore. Thank you. Signing out.
Okay.
All right.
Enjoyed it. Have a great evening, everybody. Keep in touch.
Yep. Thank you.